Hello, this is the Harboring Light. I'm Mary. I give a conservative perspective about the world around me. Feedback is most important. Feel free to reach out to me. Best way to do this is two ways: email and YouTube. Alright, so you know someone that would be interested in my content, feel free to let them know about the Harboring Light too. So on to the topic of choice here. So I'm going to, as I said, this is a series talking about American Gods. So now I'm going to get into the book. First, I'm going to talk about chapters 1 and 2. And then, I'm going to continue it out until the book is done. And then I'm going to focus on the characters and get my thoughts and everything else with that. Here we go. Now, Neil Gaiman, I believe I'm pronouncing his name right. He is very interesting how he's depicting the gods. They're old versus new gods, right? So that has a lot to do with the aspects of tradition as well. So, when you get with the new gods have different intentions by the aspects of modernity and influence and asserting their power into that. And the old gods, which have their lore, everything else, what has already built up and everybody already knows about them. And so when you look and you dive into the derivative explanations of these things, it is a lot of commentary about the aspects and the ways in which what does it mean with tradition, and what does it mean with the aspects of old and new world, where we get with America. America is traditionally seen as the newest territory, is a place of discovery to build tradition. And it's really interesting when Neil Gaiman, hold on just a minute. I'm listening to the book in the audible version of it. So you get there. I'm a person who really enjoys actually buying a book and the kinetic of it with seeing the words, touch the pages, and making notes and everything else. Now, I'm not opposed to having both versions to give variety, but it helps when you are organizing your time and allowing your time with the aspects of that. And also, there's something to be said when it comes with the right portrayer, as far as listening to books. They can, just like the power and the I guess you can say mystique, or the allure of actors, really good actors. They know how to bring things to light. Because, if all, an actor worth of salt, that's what they understand about their profession. So there's that too with the implement of not just reading and listening and, hearing yourself read the words, and so, to have that variety. All right, so, and he was saying, going back to what I was talking about on Monday, he was saying that there was a lot of people that had the disposition, because he went in and he talks about when this book initially was out and more popularity and more people knowing about it. It was around the early 2000s, around 9/11, and so 9/11 was a time to also, amongst all the tragedy that happened and changing the outlook of New York, it's still, unfortunately, with the politics of everything that's going on in New York, it's still at the wayside. But that was a time where it was really important to understand where's your value and your worth towards your country, your nationalism, really. What does that mean to you? What does that mean to protect and serve? What does that mean to honor your country during the darkest times? What does these things mean? And it was showcased in the best and worst ways when 9/11 happened. And so he went on to say, that was already a very tumultuous time, And so when he was talking about when his book came along, people either liked it or just was opposed to it. There was no in between. And that's quite interesting when things come out or when people have certain ideas about something. There's no middle ground. When there's no middle ground, it really gets into the point of why is something so divisive that way, to where there's no real discourse. Does it have to do with the cultural landscape? Does it have to do with the topic itself? What are the reasons behind these things, right? And so when you look and listen to the book, you start to realize, oh, okay, I see why it's so divisive. So for one, setting up the aspects of old gods and new gods, that's really interesting. Okay, so Mr. Wednesday, right, for instance. Let me go back because I'm trying to keep track of all the characters. Yes, Mr. Wednesday. Okay, let's go. I'm not focusing on the what's it? About 5 characters now, and then leak all that other stuff here. So Mr. Wednesday. Let's start out with him. Mr. Wednesday, in itself, he's very alluring, but he's very mysterious at the same time. And Shadow, let's see. Shadow Moon, to be example, which is very, is a foreshadowing to, his, as what you establish as his character and everything else. So, Mr. Wednesday, essentially, as things go on and the way that he presents himself and certain things that he does, start to realize that he's one of the old characters, which is, you can say the point of that he's Odin, right? And so Odin, what do people who know something about or are interested in Greek mythology, nevertheless, or have heard something about Odin, the lore behind Odin is he's a trickster, right? He is not what he seems. You always have to, keep one eye open when it comes to him, or you always have to, look at him literally, like, what are you up to? You can never truly, for the most part, think that his intentions are pure. And when Shadow Moon, the main character for him. His origin story, his arc, as I said before, he's one of the gatekeepers, because it turns to find out that there's a reason why Mr. Wednesday is so attached, is near him, and he can't escape him, because essentially he's supposed to be his bodyguard, so to speak, protector. And Shadow in itself is the embodiment, for the most part, of the American spirit, of what outside looking in, or he represents that. He's ambiguous for the most part, with the aspects of that term cultural melting pot, where it's pronounced in more ways than one that is encouraged for the aspects, even though that, which is unfortunate now, which I don't understand, with the aspects of interracial relations and people really coming together, because that is a selling point of America. Doesn't matter what your background is, as long as you have good character and good intentions and determination, you can actually have a chance, and you can actually prove your worth, prove your merit. And so when Shadow, I can see why people are being divisive about that, because, with the aspects of when you find out that he came from prison, and you start to learn that it had to do with him making a grave mistake, and that was linked to his wife, right? And all these aspects, all these aspects too of original sin, and the allegories start to kick in too, with those aspects of Adam and Eve, and the temptation and the story behind that. Because for the most part, what you take out of what the learning lesson from Adam and Eve is that no matter what you do, no matter what you think you do, you can't hide. When you start hiding things and you start going against, and you're not forthcoming about what you're doing, it will catch up to you, and there are repercussions for that, And then when when he is running and into getting reestablished back into society, he is constantly, there's temptations presenting himself in different ways. First temptation is a man that is, quite ignorant, so to speak, and he doesn't quite know what to make of him, and calls him slurs, but he has a disposition to where he's like, well, I'm not gonna give you that power over me to let what your words have to say to me influence my actions, because he in itself has learned from his mistakes, and he's trying to rebuild himself in society all over again. And that's one. And then he finds out from a essentially from what I understand, like a hitchhiker, and informing him about all these things, and then he gets informed again about another central character. Let's see. Hold on just a minute. Well, Samantha Black is who I'm kind of talking about, but I'm gonna go back to him. So the essential other figure besides Mr. Wednesday, the way that he presents himself, he is in itself reminding him where his heritage lies, and that's why he's kind of crashed towards him and everything else. And so Shadow is pulled in by all these temptations, and then when he finally gives in to the temptation of the flesh, you can say, that has to do with part of, again, allegory there. It reminds him of his wife. And then you start to, you hear and you understand that his wife is no longer living. And then when he comes to terms with everything and knows that, and feels, he starts to even though he knows that his wife is no longer there with him and everything else, he starts to get even more determined with how is he going to reestablish himself after he's this coming out of prison and then losing his loved one. And then when he comes to the funeral, more temptation is bestowed upon him from his wife's family. His wife's immediate family is his sister. No, I'm sorry. It's her sister and then her mom. Now, they have always, specifically, you start to understand and hear that his mother didn't care for him. And then it's that perpetual thing where, that stereotype of the same old story of, I have resentment for my child to actually move on and break themselves away and be their own person besides, away from their immediate family, build a life for themselves besides what they already know. And then he starts to hear with all this resentment that, his late wife's mother is presenting. Oh, well, essentially what she's doing is trying to antagonize him and say, well, essentially this is your fault because she should have always listened to me, and I'm the bearer of reason, and having that very narcissistic disposition when that's a time of loving and understanding and coming together. You start to see more of a character placement of establishment of what he was essentially battling with, and that sets up another precedent to what's going to happen to him next, and with his past, what he was dealing with, all these turmoils, and what led him to the decisions that he made, and how he essentially is reinforcing another element of him showing restraint, showing determination. And so that's another symbol into the aspects of the American spirit, which for the most part that has been the tradition, the self-determination, perseverance, just moving towards perseverance. And then when his disposition of what he thinks about his wife gets shattered, then more of a character arc of his development starts to be established all over, more and more now, to where you can see what is he going to do next. Is he going to lose his way again? And this comes out when his late wife's sister reveals to him, well, she wasn't all what you thought. She actually was having an affair with what you thought was your best friend, right? And these things, again, are presenting themselves, if you want to go into that with another element of allegory. Because, even though the American tradition was not initially established, on a Judeo-Christian belief, and there's a reason for it, because the founding fathers in themselves understood that it's far better to establish a foundation where there's no, true religion. People have the right to practice what they want to believe. That disposition between that can be having to do with Christian beliefs or moral compass. These guidelines to a moral compass start to reinforce itself again about that with infidelity, and also with what is recognizable with, particularly with the Christian faith, and the underlying sin of that, with coveting thy wife, and coveting your wife. That's one of those heavy hitters up there. And then as we move along, his wife reappears, right? And he doesn't quite know what to make of that. It's like, what does this mean for why how did this happen to where you can just be here, resurrect like that? And so those are really interesting, because not only does that have, and you can see the vision and the divisiveness, and then adding on to that, why this book can be perceived as something that's very polarizing, because there's a lot of things that again, which was what was going on with the television series and what is really going on with the book. When you delve in deep and you listen and you're willing to hear the story and and learn different aspects of everything, you start to realize, oh, I see, and this is why. And there's a lot of running themes that keep presenting themselves over and over again in American Gods in the book, which Neil Gaiman's, because I think I'm pronouncing his last name right. Gaiman is presenting over and over and over and over and over again, to the point where it looks like it's you can tell that it's on purpose, to make you uncomfortable on purpose. That perpetual idea of the elephant in the room, you know what I'm saying? And to where he's saying talking about uncomfortable subjects and merging them with subjects that's supposed to give you a moral ground. Let's blur that together and see how that works. And so, and I'll end on this. And when I'm done with the series, I'll give you all the source material and everything. So keep a lookout for that, all the source material, when I'm done with giving all of my analysis about the book. So, his wife, right? Shadow Moon's wife, which her name is all right, Laura Moon, right? When you look at it, it's very controversial, because it presents itself in the way that she symbolizes is two things, where the aspects of the resurrection of Christ, and also the concept of gods and goddesses being immortal. So which one is it? What kind of take are you presenting yourself with Laura? With why she is resurrected, why she is brought back to life. And then the way she is still trying to reassure him and reestablish, and give excuses about infidelity. And then, say, well, everything that you have suffered through and everything that I tried to help you with, it was out of my control, and everything that I was trying to do, with that old adage, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I was trying to do out of my care for you and reestablish that. And those things being murkied and blurred with the aspects of the divinity of, Christ being resurrected, and knowing that, he's an ever being powerful beyond all of us, and the whole reason for him coming to earth. And you understand that he is our, those who believe in the Christian faith and everything, those who have appreciation for the Christian faith, or, outside looking in general, if you want to go that route too. humbled himself because he has so much care and love, and it was purity in it. Where gods and goddesses, there's no most of the time there's no purity. It's just they're immortal and they're gonna do what they're gonna do, and it's very straightforward with that. And their stories that they implement doesn't necessarily have to do with empathy. And so that's another reestablishing point to where it's interesting when where it be with the arts or entertainment, when people take liberties to showcase those barriers and what they actually mean, and to essentially set a platform, so to speak, in order to talk about things that are really uncomfortable and to get the conversation going about what do these things actually mean and how do they implement their influence on society. All right, with that said, that is simply the introductory here. Now I went over 1 and 2, and then next week I'm gonna break it up where I get more and more in depth when I to move everything along. So if y'all want to keep the conversation going, feel free to reach out to me, and then also simple comment on YouTube. You have read the book or you've seen the series, feel free to give me a word about that. Alright, so this reaches the end of the Harboring Light. Tune in, turn up, and absolutely take care out there. Bye bye for now.